Hi, hello, vanakkam, and welcome back to yet another episode on Little Slaw YouTube channel. This is me, your son Shanmugam, and I welcome you all to Little Slaw YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like, share the video with your friends and your colleagues, your peers. So, in this video, so you must have already seen in the thumbnail that we are going to discuss about the thread group. So before I move on to the thread group, I would like to answer you one question. Like, why is this video or why is this thread group? Because recently I have got many questions from our subscribers in the chat or in the WhatsApp chat or in the LinkedIn chat that asking a very basic question on which thread group should I use to run a load test in JMeter, or which thread group should I use to run a stress test, and can I use this particular thread group to do a load test, or if I'm going to use this thread group, how can I do a load test? So to answer all these questions, I have created this video, and in fact I will create videos on all these thread groups, and in fact I will bring in more plugins, which is like more thread groups, and I will have create videos on each of those, so you will see how every thread groups work with JMeter. Say for example, the open model thread group, the normal, the very basic thread group, which comes in default with JMeter, and we have arrivals thread group and concurrency thread group, freeform arrivals thread group, stepping thread group, ultimate, setup, teardown. So these are all part of the JMeter, which helps you to run an effective thread group. So if you're someone who really wants to learn a JMeter, or who is looking for which thread group exactly will help you to run a perfect test to do your load test or your stress test, this video will definitely help you. So please watch the video until the end and give a like. Don't forget, please give a like, and then please do add a comment, because most of the videos which I have created, everything has come up from your questions, and in fact I have a lot of other questions from you to get to be answered. I will just make sure I answer those questions. If you really find that if I have not answered your question, please do comment in the comment section as well. So with no further delay, let's go to the video. So firstly, uh, we have a test plan. So when we create a new project, we get a test plan by default, and inside the test plan we have the thread group. So the very first element which comes in top is the thread group, because thread groups serves as the cornerstone for any JMeter test plan. So it's very important, and they act as the nucleus around which all other elements revolve. I'm really sorry, I'm making it too technical, like science related thing, but it's very easy for you to understand. So every element, if you see here, like the config element or the listener or the timer, the preprocessors, the post processors, the assertions, test fragment, non-test elements, everything will revolve around our thread group. And the controllers and the samplers are nested under the thread group if they really want to work in a proper manner. But still, we have these listeners. They can be positioned directly under the test plan. So we have so for example, if I can add any of these uh, listeners under the test plan, but their functionality will be applied universally across all the thread groups. Even, for example, if I'm going to the templates and if I'm creating a SOAP web service test plan, if you can see here, when I do create, you can see we'll get a thread group. You can see here, right? The number of users. So by default, whatever templates you create in JMeter, they have a thread group, and any HTTP request, any HTTP manager, assertions. But still, as I told you, the listeners will come outside. So they can be outside your thread group, but all the other elements like the requests, the HTTP requests, they still come inside the thread group. Say for example, let me just give you another example. So it's a bean schedule sampler. If I just go to a LDAP plan, you can see here the LDAP users, it's still under the thread group. Yes. So let me even take you to another example. So for example, even a recording, just a simple recording, this will come inside a thread group. So as I told you, every element in JMeter other than the listener will come inside the thread group, because that's how it works. So as the name suggests, the thread group element dictates the number of threads. So number of threads is, you can see here, it's the number of users. So JMeter employs these thread groups to execute the test by simulating concurrent connections to the server application. And this pivotal element offers fine-grained control over various parameters. So now we have like four different actions to be taken after a sample error. So for example, if there are any errors, we want the JMeter, or we want this thread group to continue. So what happens is, if there are any sampler errors, or if there are any errors in the samples, the thread group will continue. And we have another option where if there are any errors in the samplers, then we will start the next thread loop. For example, here we have, okay, so under the recording controller, in case if we have like 10 transactions, and if we get one error in the third or the fourth transaction, so what happens is, once the thread group gets this error, it will start the next thread loop. Say for example, if you have like 100 users, it will start, and the 100th user is facing this issue. So immediately the 101 user, which is the next user, will start his iteration, or he will start his next thread. And here we have to stop the thread. So if there are any errors, automatically that particular thread, which is that particular user, will stop his execution. So that's what the stop thread is. And when we see here the stop test, so when you face any single error in any of these thread groups, automatically the complete test will be stopped. So that's the difference. So if it is stopping thread, which is, it will stop that particular user, but when it is stop test, the entire test will stop. Even though you have any number of users, the entire test will stop the moment you choose this action. And the last one is stop test now. So this, what's the difference between stop test and stop test now? So when you do stop test, usually the JMeter will have its own settings to stop the test, where it will stop the test by sending all the users to the last transaction, and then it will stop the test very silently, or I would say in a synchronous manner, where every user will do their end transactions and then they will log out of the system. And when it is stop test now, which means the test will immediately stop from wherever the users were. Like if the first user might be in the sixth transaction, and in the second user must be in the fifth transaction, the third user must be in the fourth transaction, they immediately logs out from whatever the test they were doing, and they'll just close the test and they will jump out of the system. So that's the difference between the stop test and the stop now test now. So now you might have a question. So which one should I choose? Should I go with the default continue, or should I choose the start next thread loop, or should I choose the stop thread, or the stop test, or stop test now? So first thing is, it depends on your application's requirements. Say for example, if you really want to ignore any errors, or you can have a backup of something, like that's okay, I can run the test. If there are like some errors, I'm good to do, you can choose continue. Or if you have a requirement where if I'm facing any errors, I should go to the next iteration, so that there won't be any biased in the response time, so you can choose the start next thread loop. And if you really want to stop that particular user, just stop him, and I'm good to run all the other users, then you can use stop thread. And as I told you, stop the test, which is like if you really face any issues or any errors, you just immediately stop it. So in those scenarios, so in what scenarios we do stop test and stop test now is, you really you are using some data which you do not have option to reuse. So in those particular scenarios, you do not want to waste your data, so you can use this stop test and stop test now, so that you don't waste your valuable test data. So in those cases you can use stop test, test and stop test now. But according to me and my experience, I would say you can go with the uh, normal, the default continue, or you can use the start next thread loop in case if you really want to have a unbiased result, if you do not want to see unbiased result. So I don't say the biased will be like it's not too much, but still I would either either recommend you to use continue or the start next thread loop based on experience. So now we will move on to the parameters. So here we have three parameters, the thread properties. So first is the number of threads, which specifies the quantity of threads JMeter will utilize during the test execution phase. So this thread users, as it's mentioned in the bracket, it's the number of users. So the number of users you give here will be taken as the load. Or if, for example, like if you are giving 100 users or 100 threads, that's the load that you're giving for the application. The second one is the ramp up period. So this ramp up period will determine the duration JMeter takes to ramp up to the full number of designated threads. For instance, if 10 threads are designated and the ramp up period is set to 100 seconds, JMeter will stagger the initiation of each thread over this duration. So each thread will commence 10, like 10 seconds after the previous one begins. Say for example, the first user will start at the 0th second, the first user, yeah, and the second user will start at the 10th second, the third user will start at the 20th second. So same way each user will start his execution at for every 10 seconds, and this feature allows for controlled scaling of load over time. And in fact, this has another advantage or another property which I will tell you in the later point of time in this video. And the third one is the loop count. So we have two options. One is the infinite, and or else we can give the number of loop count. So this part will dictate the number of items the test plan should be executed by each thread group, and this parameter enables versatile testing scenarios from single runs to repeated iterations for comprehensive analysis. So in case if you are validating your script, or if you are while you are creating your script, you want to debug your script, or you want to make sure that the script is working fine. So in those scenarios, you can use one iterations to check whether your script works fine. So for that particular scenarios, you can use this, and while you are doing your test, that's the next part. So for that, we'll have to use the specified thread lifetime, but we'll see it slowly now. So before we move on to see what is the same user on each iteration, or delayed thread creation until later and specified thread lifetime, we will see few things. So each thread here, which we mentioned, is within a thread group executes the test plan independently. They are not dependent, they are independently with no dependency on other threads. Because most of us will have confusion, or will have an assumption that are they dependent or are they independent. Yes, it's very true that all these thread groups which executes the test plan independently with no dependency on other threads, and this isolation ensures accurate simulation of real world scenarios where multiple users interact with the service simultaneously, right? So they are independent and they were simultaneous. So that's the key thing you have to remember, because you might get this question in your interviews. So how does a thread group works? You can very well answer this. So they are independent. The second part is they interact with the server simultaneously. And the next part is the ramp up period. So the ramp up period, which we have discussed now, is a critical parameter which warrants for a careful consideration, because it should be sufficiently long to prevent an overwhelming surge of overload at the test onset, and yet it should be short enough to ensure that the last threads initiate before the first ones conclude, unless specifically decide otherwise. So you have to make sure that the ramp up period should be short enough to ensure that the last thread should initiate before the first ones conclude. Say for example, if your first user is running for 5 minutes or for 10 minutes, you have to make sure that the last user should start its execution before the first user ends. Because if in case the last user is X is starting after the first user is starting its second iteration, that means you are not running 100 loads. Say for example, if the first user has completed his iteration by the 4th minute and the 100th user is starting after that, that means there were only 99 users who were in the system at the same time. Hope you understand, right? So if you don't understand, please stop here and listen to it again. So one point which I'm telling you again is the ramp up period should be short enough to ensure that the last thread initiate before the first ones conclude, unless specifically desired. So unless you do not want that happen, but if you're really running a load test, I would prefer you to do that, because if the first user is running for 10 minutes, you have a flexibility to keep the last user, or you can have your ramp up period for 10 minutes. But in case if your user is running for 4 minutes, please make sure that you reduce the amount of ramp up period and make sure every user is ramped up before the first user. In fact, this is a gem point which you should remember while you are designing your thread group. Okay, you should don't forget this particular point. And please, I believe you understand whatever I have told you until this point. If you do not understand, please do stop, go again from the front, from the first, and then slowly come up and then listen to it multiple times if you really do not understand, and keep practicing it. And if you have any questions, please do comment in the comment section. So a general guideline suggests initiating with a ramp up period equal to the number of threads and subsequently adjusting it based on the observed performance metrics. And additionally, the thread group offers advanced functionality such as specifying the thread lifetime. Yes, now we have come here. Thread lifetime, which is accessible via the checkbox located at the bottom of the thread group panel. And we have the duration. So we can specify the duration for which each thread group should run. And this parameter allows for fine tuning the duration of load generation, catering to specific testing requirements. Say for example, if I want to run this test for 1 hour, it's 3600 seconds, which is 60 minutes, obviously. So by defining this way, we can change it to infinite and we can keep this duration so that the test runs for 1 hour. So upon test initiation, JMeter adheres to the configured startup delay before commencing the threads within the thread group, and subsequently it continues to execute the threads for the designated duration, thereby facilitating precise control over the test's temporal aspects. So we have discussed about the number of threads, the ramp up period, loop count, and even the thread lifetime. But what about these two? Same user on each iteration and delay thread creation until needed. So same user on each iteration does not have anything to do with the threads, which means the load, I would say, but it has something to do with the cache, because when we check this same user on each iteration, what happens is you have 100 users, and once the first 100 users have completed their execution, after that any static content that will be stored in the cache will be accessed, and they'll not be accessed from this server, because you're using the same user on each iteration. Say for example, if you are accessing to google.com or to any websites in your laptop, only for the first time, you all know that particular website will take a little more time because it needs to download all the static content from the server. But the very next time, we all know they don't go to the server, but I mean the dynamic data, yeah, but still it'll go for the server. But apart from that, for any static content, we don't normally go to the server. It takes from the local cache. So that is what this same users on each iteration does. So when you select the same user on each iteration, the data will be taken from your cache, from your local cache. And because of this, the response time will come very down. If you really want to know, or if you really want to run a test by using cache, then you can very well select this. If you really do not want to do it, if you really want every time your request to go to the server, just uncheck it. Just uncheck it, and this will uh, make the system to every time go to the server to get those data. And apart from using HTTP Cache Manager, this is one thing which will definitely help you to hit the server each and every time. And then we have the delay thread creation until needed. So before we move on to see what is delay thread creation until needed, let's see why should we use, or what are the advantages of selecting this delay thread group until needed. So this will optimize the resource utilization, and this option will reduce the overhead, and this will help us to simulate the scalability and for improved performance and flexibility. And what does this do? So this delayed thread creation until needed is a feature in JMeter's thread group that defers the creation of thread until they are required to execute. Say for example, by default, when you start a JMeter test, it creates all the threads specified in the thread group configuration immediately, regardless of whether they are immediately needed for execution. And this behavior can lead to unnecessary resource consumption, especially if you have a large number of threads specified. So by enabling the delay thread creation until needed option ensures that JMeter only creates threads as they are needed during the test execution. And this optimization helps conserve system resources, particularly your system's memory, as threads are only instantiated when they are about to be utilized. And it can be especially beneficial when dealing with larger scale tests or scenarios where the number of threads specified in the thread group which is significantly higher than the number of threads required at the start of the test. And this feature can be found in the thread groups configuration panel in JMeter, typically as a checkbox option. By enabling this option, you allow JMeter to optimize the thread management, and it improves the efficiency of test execution and reducing overhead, the resource overhead, I would say. However, it's essential to note that enabling this option might introduce slight overhead in thread creation during the test runtime, but it generally leads to better resource utilization, especially in scenarios with a large number of threads. So in case if you are running a test with more than like 500 to 1000, I would recommend you to choose this, because by default, if you see, for example, let me just open MongoDB load test. By default, if you can see, it is unselected. So if you select this will definitely save you while creating while running your test with large number of threads. So now the next question is how to run a load test using this thread group. So firstly, for example, if you want to run a user load of like 200 users, just make sure you have your ramp up period. As I have already mentioned you, make sure you have your ramp up period. Your ramp up period should be like less than your first iteration's duration. But I would say like if you are running in seconds, make sure like make it like 300 seconds so that all the users will be ramped up. Like for example, if you're running it for 200, if you're running it for 100 users, just have it for 300 seconds. And in case if you're running it for 200, just make sure you're running it, the ramp period is like around 480, which is like the first user will be running his execution for like 8 minutes. So based on that particular number, you can choose your ramp up period and then choose infinite here. And coming back to the specify your thread lifetime, in case if you're running your test for, if you really want your test to run for 1 hour, just remember the steady state is 1 hour and not the entire duration, because you are adding a ramp up period of 480 minutes already. And just add 3600, and this 3600 will be your steady state. And after this steady state, there will be a ramp down which will be taken care by the JMeter automatically, and then the startup delay of 10 seconds. So what is the startup delay? Why do we need to add this? So in case if you are doing a monitoring of your resources, you can add a startup delay, so that you can understand how the resources works before you do the test and during your test by doing the monitoring. Because what you are monitoring, once you start running this test, automatically the resource utilization, the app dynamics or the Dynatrace or any tools that you configure will start to take the results. So this delay will first take the numbers or the metrics from the service and we'll save it. And then once you start the test, automatically you can see the graphs were like running high here and there. So this will actually give you an idea of how they work. So I would suggest you at least to keep like 180 seconds, which is like close to 3 minutes, so that you can see how they really play. So this is for the load test. And coming to the stress test. So if you really want to use this particular thread group to do a stress test, this is my settings for you. So make it, for example, like 1500 if you really want to break the system, or like 2500, whatever users count you need. Just make it the numbers here. And then the ramp up period, I would say, since they are in seconds, you can just say, for example, like if you really want to break the system in 10 minutes, just make it like 600. Or if you really want to allow the system to play on its own playground, just make it to 1200, which is like 20 minutes of its time to play. And after the 20 like by the time it reaches 20 minutes, you will have all the 2500 users in the system, and they'll be running the test. So they'll be like slowly ramping up, like each and every users will be slowly ramping up, and by the time it reaches 20 minutes, you'll be having all the 2500 users in the system who will be like playing like anything. And by the time you will see, your system will be like, is resilient or not, or is that breaking down. In fact, if you really want to increase it, please make sure that you can increase any number of users here, and make sure that you are using the delay thread creation until needed. And then you can, in fact, you can reduce the throughput as well. Yeah, sorry, the ramp up period, you can just make it to 600, so that by the moment like 10 minutes, all the 5000 users will be in the system, so that there will be like enough number of stress in this thread, in the application. So I think I have answered your questions. For those who really wonder for what or how can you use this thread group for load test, or how can you use this for stress test, so I have explained you clearly. In case if you really still have any queries, please do watch the video again. And if you still again have any questions, please do comment in the comment section. We'll discuss in a separate video. So thank you so much, so much for watching this entire video, and I'll take a break, and we will meet in our next video. Until then, it's bye bye from Shanmugam and Little Slaw.